What is going on, everybody? My name is Ben Wolby. This is my co-host, Alex Caruso.
And today we are talking about buy lows, sell highs, and players that we have to be starting in fantasy football for this year. For this week. Excuse me. We're in week 10. We're in the back half of the season. Playoffs are quickly approaching. I think now is the time more than ever that we have to start planning of what our fantasy football teams look like come the playoffs. Obviously, winning the next couple of weeks is really important, but we have to start looking at playoff schedules and players that do have good schedules, players that don't. We don't have to worry about his injuries as much anymore because the playoffs are so close, and it's time to start planning to winning for a championship. So, Ben, let's start with you. Where is the first buy low player that we need to be getting before the fantasy playoffs right now?
I think that DK Metcalf is going to help you win a fantasy football championship because you can buy low right now. He's one of my favorite buy lows right now. Before his buy, all four of his games, he scored double-digit games in fantasy football. But since his buy, he's failed to have a single one. He's really not been great over the past month. And I think that's why he is somebody that you can get for pretty cheap, right? Over his last two games, he's had 6 catches for 117 yards. That is not a lot, but those 6 catches came on 18 targets. Wow. I think a lot of people think that Lockett looks like he's been the wide receiver one on Seattle because of the fantasy points he's been scoring, but he's not. DK Metcalf leads the Seahawks in the 8 healthy games that he has played this season. And with softer matchups ahead against Washington and the Rams, I think that you can buy a top 24 wide receiver for a wide receiver 3 price tag. So I'm buying DK Metcalf at that price all day long.
Yeah, I think DK Metcalf's a really great buy. He has the easiest playoff schedule of anybody in all of fantasy football. Each of the final 3 matchups of the season, which lead up to the fantasy championship, he plays a bottom 6 team versus wide receivers. Definitely someone I'm buying. I'd be buying him, Lockett, and JSN for those reasons. I'm also buying David Montgomery, who in his full games this year has 27 touches per game. Obviously, with Jahmyr Gibbs, it's not going to be that much, but Gibbs has been used very similarly to how DeAndre Swift was last year for the Lions. And David Montgomery at least should be seeing between 15 and 20 touches per game, even with Jahmyr Gibbs breaking out. No team in the NFL is averaging more expected fantasy points to their running backs than the Detroit Lions over the last 2 years. I think that he is primed to keep pushing on. He's got 3 straight really great matchups to kind of get back into the swing of things.
Alex, I love David Montgomery. I've been talking about David Montgomery since probably July, to be honest with you. But I am curious. We know how this offense wants to run the ball. They want to do that with David Montgomery, not Jahmyr Gibbs. We know that from what we've seen when Ben Johnson was the offensive coordinator last year. But does it concern you at all that Jahmyr Gibbs has looked better than DeAndre Swift has ever looked with the Lions? And maybe, just maybe, they don't go back to using David Montgomery like they did before his injury.
Yeah, well, Dan Campbell talked about in a press conference a day or two ago now, where he just said that like David Montgomery is still going to have a really big role, and we're going to be looking to get touches for both of these guys. So yes, that would have been my worry, but Dan Campbell's been really reliable with how he talks in press conferences, and I think that with what he said about David Montgomery this week, it doesn't sound like his role is going to go away.
And I love that. I absolutely love David Montgomery. He's been one of my favorite guys to draft since the offseason. And if you can get him for a good price right now, he's got to be one of the best buy lows at the running back position, similar to Cooper Kupp, who I think is one of the best buy lows, if you'd call him that, at the wide receiver position. Cooper Kupp is still Cooper's Kupp. We saw him dominate in his first 2 games back as a top wide receiver, but it just so happened that Matt Stafford, his health has kind of been a question mark, and Brett Wright being, well, it turns out he doesn't get breakfast with Cooper Kupp like Matt Stafford does every morning, right? But since all of that has started happening, Cooper Kupp has failed to score double-digit fantasy points in 3 straight games. And I think now he's priced outside of the top 10 wide receivers, which is good for you if you want to buy him, because what if he starts playing like the Cooper Kupp of old again? And I think he will, right? A top 5 wide receiver. The Cooper Kupp we saw, who's a top 5 wide receiver, we saw him his 2 first games, average of 20 fantasy points in those 2 games. And I'm encouraged about Matt Stafford's health. I know that they just signed Carson Wentz. And let's say Stafford doesn't come back. Carson Wentz is still an upgrade over Rypien. Wentz had several relevant fantasy wide receivers with 25% targets per route run and 10 or more fantasy points per game. And again, that's a mark that Kupp has not hit in 3 straight weeks, and you can buy him at that price as if he's unable to do that. So if you can get Cooper Kupp at wide receiver 2 prices, I think there is a shot for him to be a top 10 wide receiver the rest of the way.
I mean, he's still averaging 9 targets a game right now. I mean, like Cooper Kupp right now, people are seeing the injuries. They're seeing he's 30 years old and they're getting scared away. But I think people forget that on a per game basis, like he is as good as anybody in fantasy football still. And the target volume has still been there. He's had at least 7 targets every week. So why are we going away from him? The same way the Saints aren't going away from Taysom Hill right now. Taysom Hill has finished as the tight end 6 or better for 4 straight weeks. And he has at least 9 touches in every single week between carries or rush attempts. I mean, even last week, he threw for a passing touchdown. Anytime they're in the red area, they are scoring with Taysom Hill, whether it's running the ball, passing the ball, receiving. They've been using him as a weapon for fantasy football, and he is still on waiver wires in over 30% of leagues right now. I don't see how he is. I think you should be buying him right now because people don't realize how big of a cheat code that he is in fantasy football every week, because he plays probably the most unique role in the entire NFL as it comes to anybody that is a skill position player.
Over the last 4 weeks, right? Over the last month of fantasy football, do you know who the tight end 1 is?
There's no way it's Taysom Hill.
It's Taysom Hill.
Is it actually? Over the last month? I would have said it was Kelsey or Hawkinson or literally any other tight end.
On a per game basis, Taysom Hill has outscored every single tight end over the last month of football.
That is ridiculous. I mean, it only speaks to how much we should be buying him, because he was still on waiver wires in almost every league going into last week. And even after this week, the fact that we've had 2 weeks, like he's been doing this for a month and he's still available in 30% of leagues. I know that people are screaming right now, well, he's not available in my league. Well, I'm sorry that you have the smartest fantasy league of all time, but still a lot of leagues that Taysom Hill not owned in, probably should be, might be a top 5 tight end rest of season. But on the reverse side of this, what are the players that we don't want on our team? Because there's a lot of really good players that I think don't have great schedules, or we have reasons to be selling them. Like, who's someone that scares you as we're approaching the fantasy playoffs?
It might come as a surprise, Alex, but I'm worried about Saquon Barkley, right? Like, moving forward, it's easy to see how Saquon is going to be an RB1 moving forward, especially when we talk about volume and volume alone, right? In his career, Saquon only had 10% of the Giants' targets when Daniel Jones was the starter. But last week, small sample with Tommy DeVito, he saw a 23% target share. That's really high. We know that the Giants offense is going to run through Saquon Barkley moving forward. But so do NFL defenses, right? It's not going to run through Paris Campbell. It's not going to run through Darius Slayton. It's not going to run through Wan'Dale Robinson. These are the only recognizable names in this offense. We know who is going to move the ball. And that's why I like Saquon from a volume perspective. But last week with DeVito, Saquon saw 6 targets, a target on 23.1% of his routes run. Again, a number he'd only beaten 4 times with Daniel Jones. But those 6 targets combined for 4 receptions and 17 yards. That is less than 4 points, right? That's really nothing in the grand scheme of things. It's not going to help you win a championship for sure. Volume is king, but this team is going to struggle to move the ball. Saquon might see a lot of volume, but he's not going to be efficient in doing it. And the worst part, the absolute worst part, is that the Giants have an implied team total this week of just 11 points. So that's maybe 1 touchdown, right? Maybe. And there's a good chance that touchdown comes in garbage time from a player who's not Saquon. There's a good chance that Saquon only scores 1 or 2 touchdowns the rest of the season. How good is this offense going to be at scoring touchdowns moving forward? I don't think you can justify him as a top 5 running back moving forward. And if I can sell him at that price, I will do that all day long.
Yeah, I think beyond just the fact that you're selling him, like, what if they shut him down? You know what I mean?
Sure.
Daniel Jones is out. They're probably going to be out of playoff contention like 5 or 6 weeks before the season is pretty much over at this point. So, like, what's the point of, relying on him and running him into the ground in meaningless games? So we saw it happen before with Christian McCaffrey when he was on the Panthers. Like, once they're out of playoff contention, they have no reason to be continuing to run him into the ground. That would also be my worry. I also am worried about the playing time of Kenneth Walker. I mean, Kenneth Walker has been outsnapped the last 2 weeks by Zach Charbonnet. Maybe he's not a sell high at this point, but his schedule could not be worse going forward. He plays the Washington Commanders this week, mid-tier matchup, but every week from weeks 11 through 15, that is 5 games, he plays one of the top 10 toughest run defenses in the league, which is really, really bad. I mean, this year in the 3 games against top 10 run defenses, he put up 18, 7, and 2 fantasy points. Does not give me a lot of confidence that he's gone down in fantasy points for 4 straight weeks and then now is about to play 5 straight top 10 teams. I just can't be buying Kenneth Walker right now with how things have been going.
And there's a really good chance if you drafted Kenneth Walker, you're in the contention for the
Yep,
playoffs, right? He's been one of the
exactly.
best values at the running back position. So when you think about how your roster needs to be structured for that playoff run, it can't have Kenneth Walker on it, right, Alex? Like, there's got to
Yeah.
be other guys out there you could trade Kenneth Walker for that put you in a better situation, like David Montgomery.
Totally. I think there's a lot of players that can kind of fit that bill that you can look for, but I just don't think that his like final like championship week schedule does get a lot better. Like his fantasy playoff matchups are decent, but I think that he's going to hurt some people down the stretch run. And I think if there are some people that you could be looking for that would give you a better chance come playoff time, or if you're right on the fringe right now making the playoffs, I think there's just better options than Kenneth Walker. But I know usually we try to let you come up with your own player and say it, but I'm having a little bit of trouble seeing why you want to be selling George Kittle right now. Again, like the tight end landscape has been really, really tough this year, probably more than ever, that there aren't like Taysom Hill's the tight end 1 in points per game over the last month. That should tell you what the tight end position is doing right now. So why would we be selling George Kittle?
I mean, it's the same thing about Taysom Hill, right? There are just better options available. And when you look at George Kittle over the past month, he's averaged 14 fantasy points per game. He's scored more than Jalen Waddle, Jamar Chase, Keenan Allen, right? Over the past month, George Kittle has been one of the best tight ends in fantasy football. But Deebo Samuel is coming back. And with Deebo off the field this year, he's averaging almost 3 more targets. His target share changes dramatically. And Deebo Samuel's coming back this week. So we're going to see that, 3 fewer targets that he's been seeing. His target share dropped from 26% to 15%. And not to mention that Kittle is more efficient with Deebo off the field. Now Deebo is coming back, right? The Niners are playing the Jaguars. They've allowed the 10th most fantasy points per game to the wide receiver position. And now that they're going to have Ayuk, they're going to have extra guys worrying about Deebo. I think Ayuk, there might be some pressure taken off him. He'll be the huge target this week. I just don't see it for George Kittle. I don't think it's a good matchup. And sure, he's one of the premium tight ends in the NFL, but I am worried about him rest of season when there are just so many talented guys on that offense. So I think if I can take him and I can get Taysom Hill, or I can trade for Dalton Kincaid or Sam Laporta, I'd rather get the extra guy. I'd rather sell high on George Kittle. I'm just worried about that outlook with that offense the rest of the season.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, again, there is the outlook problem, and with Deebo Samuel coming back, I think that the tight end position is a little bit tougher for me to sell because there are so few really great options. So anytime a player is performing at the toughest position to find players, that's when I have a harder time to sell, where I have an easier time selling someone like Davante Adams when there's more wide receivers that are fantasy relevant than any other position in the NFL. Where I'm concerned about Davante Adams because now with Jimmy G gone and Aiden O'Connell or Brian Hoyer is probably going to be starting the rest of the year, like that concerns me come fantasy playoffs, because like Davante I still think is really great, but I think like we're going to see a lot of inconsistency where he's going to have games where he could give you over 20 points, but he could have you a game where he's going to give you 2 catches. I think that's my problem, where there are a lot more options to start at wide receiver, and I just don't trust the quarterback play of him come fantasy playoff time.
All offseason, you were telling me that I was the biggest Raider hater of all time. I was saying I do not want any of Davante Adams. Have I rubbed off on you, Alex?
I was not with you on Davante Adams. Like I was sorry, I was with you where I wasn't buying him either, and your case made sense. But like I think the name value alone can allow us to sell players like George Kittle and Davante Adams as a whole. But right now, again, like we keep talking about, a theme has started to be fantasy playoffs are coming around. So like, who's someone this week right now that you think could help carry people towards a really big win right now? Because week 10 is a really important week. There's a lot of players on bye. Where are you finding value this week for fantasy?
You love ending every single show with, keep chasing that upside. And I think that there are fewer upside guys that you can start right now than DJ Moore. I think he's a must start wide receiver this week, right? I recognize he hasn't been great with Tyson Bagent as of late. He only saw 5 targets, 3 receptions, and 44 yards last week, but he did lead the team in routes run. He is the team's #1 wide receiver. But the reason he becomes a must start, let's say Justin Fields comes back for tomorrow's game against Carolina, which he is expected to do. DJ Moore with Justin Fields is averaging 17.4 half-point PPR points per game. And through 9 weeks, the only other wide receivers doing that are Tyreek Hill, A.J. Brown, and Stephon Diggs. DJ Moore, he's not a locked and loaded starter like that group. He's not on the talent. He doesn't have the offensive prowess that those teams have, but he does have a decent matchup against Carolina, allowing the 10th most receiving touchdowns per game. And I know there's some rockiness. Justin Fields coming back from his, injury. Typically we see a drop off in production, but you got to like what the DJ Moore has been doing with Justin Fields. And I'm willing to roll the dice and say, this is why you drafted DJ Moore. He's going to have up weeks. He's going to have down weeks. But when he has been playing with Justin Fields, he has had a ton of up weeks. I want to keep that going this week against Carolina.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I think that people forget sometimes that, similar to what we just talked about with Davante Adams, that like the quarterback play can be everything for wide receivers. And even though people don't love Justin Fields as a passer, I mean, like, he has been really, really good, and he's seeing volume with Justin Fields, and volume is the most important thing for me. Chris Olave is someone that's really similar to me because, like, right now, there have been just 8 wide receivers to see 85 or more targets this year, and 6 out of those 8 are top 10 wide receivers. The only players that are not top 10 are Michael Pittman, who is the wide receiver 14, and Chris Olave is the wide receiver 19. He is like the unluckiest wide receiver in the NFL right now for players seeing that level of volume. And I think this matchup this week against Minnesota is a perfect matchup for him. They've been one of the 5 worst teams versus outside wide receivers in the NFL this year, which is where Chris Olave plays the majority of his snaps. And I think that this week, like, we've been saying it for so long, but like, Chris Olave continues to see volume. He's averaging 10.5 targets per game over the last month. And again, he's just due for positive regression because every other player seeing this many targets has had a lot more fantasy production than him. And I don't think that's just a coincidence.
We're talking about Alvin Kamara as a top 10 running back the rest of the season. We're talking about Taysom Hill as a top 5, top 3 tight end the rest of the season. How does Chris Olave fit into that picture? Derek Carr has not looked great, right? Like, how does Chris Olave, how good can he be for the rest of the season?
Well, Taysom Hill is primarily seeing running work. You know what I mean? Like, he's had like 1 game over 5 targets all season. So I'm not worried about him taking too many. And Alvin Kamara has been averaging by far way more targets than any other running back in the NFL. So I think that, again, like for Alvin Kamara, probably due for a little bit of negative regression where he's not going to be seeing like 9 targets a game for a whole season. Like, running backs have never done that in NFL history. We saw his playing time go down. Taysom Hill, same thing, not seeing target volumes. Those kind of things don't worry me for Chris Olave. One other note for this week is that his target rate has been like 30% when facing the blitz versus 23% when not facing the blitz. Minnesota blitzes as much as any team in the NFL. I think this is a perfect get-right matchup for him with how the target rates have gone against blitz, at least for this week.
Yeah, it's a really great matchup, and I think it'll finally tell us, and you tell me if you agree. If Chris Olave doesn't do it this week, is there hope for him the rest of the way?
No, I think that I will officially be ready to go out on Chris Olave if he doesn't produce at least double-digit fantasy points this week.
All right, clip that. I want to see this as a viral clip on Twitter, Alex. I think another guy in a similar boat is Aaron Jones. I've been in on Aaron Jones for a few weeks, but I think this will be a really big tell if Aaron Jones is back, right? Last week, Matt LaFleur said it was time to get the ball to Aaron Jones, and he delivered, right? Jones saw 24 touches. That was the most he's seen all season. That was more than even A.J. Dillon had seen all season at the running back position, right? So it's clear that the Packers felt last week like Aaron Jones is back. He is healthy. And now they're facing a Steelers defense allowing the 7th most fantasy points to the running back position, right? So for me, this is a must-start game for Aaron Jones because he was a top 12 running back last week. And if he can continue to do that this week, Aaron Jones is back the rest of the season. I'm starting him this week under that expectation. But now, this is the second week, along with week one, where Aaron Jones proved he's the best playmaker on this team. And if he can continue to prove that with where his health is at and in this matchup, I want him as the rest of the season as a running back too.
Yeah, I mean, this offense has looked less and less hopeful with Jordan Love all season. And I think that not having a weapon like Aaron Jones has been a big reason for that. And in the 2 games that we've seen Aaron Jones get like most of the snaps, he's been like phenomenal. So I think that that's probably one thing that's hopefully going to continue. What do you think about Christian Watson really quick? I mean, Christian Watson, someone that we both believed in, wasn't necessarily like a high floor player, but the ceiling could not be higher. He's got a really good matchup this week. He had 8 targets in his only other good matchup. I know it's not really fair, but he hasn't produced. Like, do you see any hope for Christian Watson, or are you out on him similar to Olave?
I think that we are past the time I would have wanted for Christian Watson. I think he's droppable in all formats, but he does have a good matchup this week. I think if he's on your roster, you might as well hold on to him to one more week, because if he has a good week this week, then he's going to be next week's biggest waiver ad. Yeah. But I think we should have seen the writing on the wall, right? Like, he saw 7 touchdowns on how many receptions? Not a ton. So I think the writing has been on the wall. Christian Watson, he needs a good quarterback play. That's the theme of this episode this week, Alex. And it's just not there for Jordan Love. So Christian Watson's droppable. If you haven't dropped him yet, hang on to him through this week, but he has been droppable for some time now.
Yep. Going back to the people that I love this week, I think this has got to be a prime week to get Bijan Robinson back in tow. I mean, last week he had 42 snaps and 14 touches, and Tyler Allgeier had 15 touches on 24 snaps. It doesn't make sense. Bijan is better than in every single category imaginable, and Arthur Smith could not have decimated this fantasy offense anymore. But he's playing the Cardinals, who have been like a human cheese grater versus running backs this year. They've been beyond Swiss cheese, and I think this is a mega elite running back matchup for Bijan Robinson today. He's getting the volume every single week. The Cardinals could not be a better matchup, but I think this is going to be his biggest game of the entire season.
You are so cringe, Alex. Where are you at with Tyler Allgeier? You think he's worth rostering for the fantasy playoffs?
No, I don't think he's worth rostering. Not at all. I think that
really,
even if he's just not efficient, he might see 10 plus touches every single week, but he's not efficient. It's just hope that he falls into the end zone. And I think that the Falcons ownership has to start threatening Arthur Smith's job if they don't get Bijan more involved, because you drafted him at 8th overall. You can't be using Tyler Allgeier more than him in any game. And I think it's time for them to start sending him threats to start using Bijan more, or he's going to be on the couch watching football with us this Sunday.
I'll tell you this about Arthur Smith. He shaved his mustache in Movember, so he is not a man of the people. And maybe we've known that already, but he proved it to me this last week by shaving his mustache. I think that Tyler Allgeier is worth rostering strictly as a handcuff if you're making a playoff push and you don't have Bijan Robinson, but that's just because we know that he'll be good, or at least he'll see a lot of volume, but that offense, not much to look forward to.
Yeah, last player I want to talk about really quick is Leonard Fournette. We talked about him last week. He was my number 1 waiver ad. I'm still really confident in Leonard Fournette. He was on the practice squad, but James Cook continues to just absolutely not impress me. Latavius Murray looks like, a bag of Doritos that you found in your garage. We're you have Doritos, you don't find them anywhere else in the house, but they're stale, they're old, and you don't want them anymore. And Leonard Fournette, again, top 12 running back-to-back years. I think he's got some juice, and I think that he's going to add to this team the second he gets onto the active roster a lot more than anybody.
I am a little bit worried. James Cook has been a big part of this offense. And yeah, he hasn't been mega elite, as you like to say, Alex. But I'm concerned that Leonard Fournette won't be mega elite either. Leonard Fournette is a good football player. We've seen him be a good football player. He's been a fantasy football player I've wanted to have on my fantasy football teams for the past 2 years. But this year, how can we be confident that he's going to come in and look like the Leonard Fournette of old? Because of how thick his quads looked? He's been on the couch for the last 8-9 weeks, right?
But you could make the fresh legs argument in that he's ready. His quads are looking good. If you look at him in practice, he has not taken the hits this year where a lot of other running backs had. Yes, he has been sitting on the couch, but if you look at him physically, it does not look like he's been missing any time. He has not taken the hits. We've seen a lot of injuries to running backs, and the Buffalo Bills, outside of Damian Harris, have actually been one of the healthier running back rooms in the league this year. And I think that might speak a little bit to the fact that I'm not saying they're due, but I think that guys are going to get worn down because they're playing so many games in a row. And I think there could be a time for Leonard Fournette to take over, but we can digress on that. No one wants to talk about Leonard Fournette all day. Go ahead.
Hang on. There's his new nickname, Alex. We got Fresh Leg Lenny.
Fresh Leg Lenny. I mean, Fresh Leg Lenny is back. I mean, how could you not? Fresh Leg Lenny, fantasy playoffs. He's got a really good matchup. Like, I don't think that people need him right now. I'm not saying that he's going to be good in like this week or next week, but after their bye week, come fantasy playoff time, I think that is when Leonard Fournette is going to win people some leagues. So I think that is it. It's all about chasing. It's all about chasing the upside. So don't forget to like, subscribe, turn the bell notifications on for more 33rd team goodness coming out each and every single day. But until next time, don't forget, as always, to keep chasing that upside.